Okay, so are you ready to dive into the world of Charles Manson?
Oh, absolutely. A man who really makes you question the line between a true visionary leader and someone who is just really good at manipulating people, a con artist,
Yeah.
you know?
A grifter or gifted? I mean, that's what this whole deep dive is about, right? Was he gifted or was he a grifter? Everyone knows about the Manson family and the Tate LaBianca murders is horrifying, but we're going way beyond just the headlines for this one.
Right, we have to.
We've got some original articles about Manson himself and um, court transcripts that are just chilling, and even some insights into how Hollywood's portrayed them, once upon a time in Hollywood.
Yeah, and it's wild how even decades after his death, he's still like this cultural touchstone.
Right.
Like books and films and documentaries, it's like we can't look away from the darkness he created.
Exactly. So to even begin to understand this guy and the terrifying influence he had, we have to go back to the beginning.
Yeah, his childhood.
And let's just say it wasn't exactly like a fairy tale.
No, not at all. Pretty much every source we looked at paints a picture of a deeply troubled upbringing. Poverty, neglect, constantly in trouble with the law. He spent years and years in institutions.
Yeah, I read that like a huge chunk of his youth was spent locked up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this one detail that I found just chilling. In 1967, he actually begged authorities to let him stay in prison.
Wow.
He felt like he couldn't handle the outside world. It's like prison was his twisted version of like a safe space.
Yeah, talk about a red flag.
Huge, right?
Yeah.
But obviously prison didn't hold him forever.
No, in 67, after he was released, he ended up in San Francisco.
Oh, wow. So right in the middle of the counterculture movement.
Exactly, prime time for his. And that's where he started building his family, right?
Yeah.
And this is where I think his manipulation skills really become clear. I mean, he preyed on vulnerable people, most of them, young women searching for meaning in a time of like crazy social change.
Yeah, everyone's looking for belonging and purpose, right?
Exactly. And he swooped right in and he offered them exactly that.
But on his terms.
Of course, on his terms. He used this really potent mix of cultural appropriation, isolation, and this distorted religious stuff to create this sense of like utter dependence. It's like his followers were completely hypnotized.
Totally loyal. I read about how he even used the Beatles song, Helter Skelter, to preach about some apocalyptic race war.
Yeah, he completely twisted the song's meaning, claiming it predicted this war that would make him all-powerful. And he actually called this vision Helter Skelter.
And his followers believed him.
Sadly, a hook, line, and sinker.
Which ultimately led to those horrific murders in the summer of '69.
The Tate LaBianca murders.
2 nights of brutality that shocked the entire country and really became synonymous with the dark side of the '60s.
For sure.
I mean, we have to talk about the victims.
Yeah.
It started on August 8th at the home of Sharon Tate, the actress, and her husband, Roman Polanski, the director.
Yeah, Sharon Tate was 8.5 months pregnant at the time.
And she was stabbed 16 times.
Poor.
3 of her friends were also killed that night. Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, and Wojciech Frykowski. And Abigail Folger was stabbed 28 times.
Oh, my God.
And then you have Stephen Parent, the caretaker's friend, who just happened to be visiting that night.
He was killed, too.
Just unimaginable. And then the very next night, Lena and Rosemary LaBianca were murdered in their own home.
Yeah.
And the killers wrote these messages on the walls in the victim's blood. Things like, rise, death to pigs, and they even misspelled helter skelter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, reflecting Manson's warped ideology.
Yeah.
They even carved the word war on Lena LaBianca's stomach.
God, the details are just gruesome. It really shows the level of depravity that Manson inspired in these people.
It's just mind-blowing to me that Manson himself wasn't actually at any of the murders.
Right. He didn't physically kill anyone, but
But he ordered his followers to do it.
he ordered them. He had complete control over their actions.
So even though he didn't, lift a finger, he was still held responsible.
Absolutely. The trial was this media circus. It was actually one of the first televised trials, so people were watching the whole thing unfold from their living rooms.
Yeah.
And Manson's behavior just fueled the frenzy even more. He carved a swastika into his forehead and he just flayed it up for the cameras.
Like he knew the power of his own image.
Exactly. And even though he wasn't physically at the murders, he was convicted and initially sentenced to death.
Wow.
Later, it was commuted to life in prison. The family members who actually carried out the killings, they also received life sentences.
And even from prison, behind bars, he still had this hold over his followers.
Oh, yeah. He continued to write letters to them, and he even got marriage proposals.
Really?
It's insane. It shows just how deep his influence ran and how he could still manipulate people even when he was locked up.
So this is where things get really interesting for this deep dive.
Right. Was he a visionary leader? Was he this magnetic figure who tapped into the anxieties of his time? Or was he just a master manipulator, a con artist, preying on people desperate to believe in something?
Because there are people out there who see him as some kind of anti-establishment hero, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing that makes this so fascinating, even after he died in 2017, that fascination continues. It's fueled by all these controversies that still surround him, like that fight over his supposed fortune and the contested will.
Right.
You've got multiple people claiming to be his heir and these memorabilia collectors fighting over anything linked to him. And then you have Once Upon a Time in Hollywood reimagining the whole Manson family saga, blurring the lines between what really happened and what's fiction.
Yeah, it's really hard to separate it all sometimes.
It makes the question grifter or gifted so much harder to answer.
Yeah. It's not even about liking him or hating him. It's about trying to understand how someone with such a messed up past could gain that level of influence and inspire such awful acts.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to keep digging into. Was he a visionary or just a master manipulator?
Stay tuned. We're going to unravel the layers of Manson's story to see if we can finally answer that question. It's just crazy to think about how Manson managed to manipulate so many people. What were his tactics? Like, how did he get that level of control over his followers?
Well, you have to remember what was going on back then, the late 1960s. I mean, it was a time of massive upheaval. The Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, there was this feeling of like disillusionment and rebellion in the air. You know, especially among young people.
So Manson, like, tapped into that.
Exactly. He positioned himself as this kind of guru, this father figure, offering a sense of community and purpose to all these people who felt lost and alienated. And he talked about love and peace, but underneath all that, there was this much darker ideology.
Oh, Skelter, right?
Yeah, helter-skelter, this whole twisted interpretation of the Beatles song. It became a cornerstone of everything he taught. He was saying that a race war was coming, this conflict between black and white America that was going to destroy civilization as we know it.
I mean, did he actually believe that? Or was it just a way to manipulate people?
It's tough to say for sure. Some experts think he genuinely believed in this twisted vision of the future, while others think it was all calculated a way to grab power.
So he was telling his followers that they would need to go into hiding during this apocalyptic war.
Yes, and he promised them that they would emerge as the rulers of this new world order. And this idea of being part of something bigger, having a special role to play in this upheaval, it was really seductive to his followers, especially those who were already feeling marginalized and disillusioned.
Yeah, it's classic cult behavior, right?
Oh, absolutely. Manson created this whole cult-like atmosphere, sleep deprivation drugs, psychological manipulation. He used all of it to break down his followers' sense of self. They became completely dependent on him for everything, and he encouraged sexual promiscuity, often using it as a tool for control.
So this is where everything takes a turn towards those murders.
Right. Manson started talking about the need to accelerate the race war to actually instigate a violent uprising.
So he was the one who told him to commit those killings.
He instructed them to carry out these incredibly brutal acts targeting wealthy and influential people. It was all part of his plan to ignite this conflict that he kept talking about.
And the details of those murders are just horrific. Sharon Tate and her friends attacked in their home, and then the LaBiancas murdered the next night.
The level of violence was just shocking. They left messages written in blood invoking helter-skelter and other symbols connected to Manson's ideology. It was deliberate. They wanted to spread fear and chaos.
I can only imagine what the trial was like.
Oh, it was one of the most sensational trials in American history. Manson, with his wild eyes and that swastika carved into his forehead, he became a symbol of pure evil. And his followers, mostly young women, they seemed totally under his spell, chanting and singing in the courtroom.
Like they were brainwashed.
That's the term that a lot of people use to describe the Manson family. Yeah, his hold over them was just profound.
It's just hard to understand how anyone could have that kind of power over others to convince them to commit such horrible acts.
That's the big question about Charles Manson, isn't it? Was he a true believer in his own twisted vision of the world? Or was he a master manipulator just exploiting vulnerabilities for his own sick purposes?
It's a question that still fascinates people and disturbs people even today.
Yeah, and his influence is everywhere, true crime documentaries, Hollywood movies. He's this constant reminder of the dark side of charisma and the dangers of just blindly following someone.
Speaking of movies, you mentioned Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I know that movie has a fictionalized version of the Manson family in it. What's interesting is that the film kind of reimagines how the events of that summer played out. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really compelling take on the story. The movie acknowledges the darkness of the Manson family, but it adds this layer of fantasy. It blurs the lines between what actually happened and what's made up.
Which seems to be a theme with the whole Manson case, right? This blurring of reality and myth and manipulation.
Exactly, and I think that's why it continues to be so captivating. It forces us to confront this really dark side of the American dream, the allure of charismatic figures, the fragility of our own beliefs.
And even though Manson died back in 2017, the story doesn't end there.
No, not at all. His legacy continues, and not just in pop culture, but also in the legal battles over his estate.
Right. There are multiple people claiming to be his heir, all fighting over whatever money he supposedly had. There's Michael Channels, who says he has a will that names him as Manson's sole inheritor.
And then there's Jason Freeman, who claims to be Manson's grandson he's staking a claim to. It's just this bizarre and messy situation.
It's like even from beyond the grave, he's still manipulating people.
Exactly. The fight over his estate with all these accusations of forgery and manipulation flying around just shows you how powerful Manson's ability to sow discord and exploit people really was.
This deep dive has taken us to some dark places.
It definitely has, but I think it's important that we examine these difficult stories. We can learn from them and figure out how to protect ourselves from the people out there who exploit and manipulate others.
Because there are people like Manson in every era, right? People who prey on vulnerability, who make false promises and push dangerous ideologies.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why it's so important to be critical thinkers, to question what we see and hear, and to be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers.
It's almost like even after he was gone, his notoriety became this weird kind of currency.
Yeah, it really shows the impact this whole case had on our culture. I mean, he became this pop culture icon, right? Like a symbol of the dark underbelly of the 60s. His image is everywhere, the swastika, the wild eyes. It's instantly recognizable.
Yeah, it's almost like a caricature of evil.
Right.
It's unsettling, though. How can someone so clearly disturb someone who orchestrated such horrific acts still have this hold over us? It's like he's still got this power over our collective imagination.
It's something people are still trying to understand, and we're seeing similar patterns even today, right? Like you have figures who use their charisma and manipulation to gain power and influence.
Yeah. But are they really visionaries trying to lead us to a better future? Or are they just con artists out to make a quick buck?
Right.
Grifters.
Exactly.
So after this deep dive into Manson's life and his legacy, where do you land on that question? Visionary or con artist?
I mean, based on everything we've looked at, I'd have to say con artist. He was a master manipulator who knew exactly how to exploit the anxieties and the vulnerabilities of the time,
Yeah.
He offered this really warped sense of belonging and this totally distorted vision of the future, and ultimately he led his followers down a path of destruction.
And his victims weren't chosen at random either.
Yeah.
Right. He targeted people in Hollywood like Sharon Tate.
Right, and that adds another layer to all of this. Was it just about stirring up racial tensions, or was there something more personal going on? Was there some kind of resentment towards the Hollywood elite?
Maybe we'll never know for sure.
Probably not.
But it's a reminder that even in all the chaos, there were calculated choices being made.
Yeah.
Choices that led to those horrible acts.
It really underscores why it's so important to scrutinize the motivations of people seeking power and influence, Are they actually trying to do some good in the world? Or are they using manipulation and fear just to get ahead?
It all comes back to that question.
Yeah.
Grifter or gifted?
Right.
We need to be asking that question, not just about figures from the past, but about people in positions of power today.
Absolutely, because the echoes of Manson's story are still relevant. The allure of charisma, the danger of blind obedience, the potential for manipulation to have devastating consequences. It's all still happening.
So as you go about your day, think about the warning signs we talked about today. The exploitation of vulnerability, the twisting of facts, the promise of easy answers to complex problems.
Right. Those are the hallmarks of manipulation, whether it's happening on a grand scale like with Manson or in our own personal lives.
Be critical of what you see and hear, ask questions, and trust your gut.
Yeah.
Because in the end, that's our best defense against the people who would try to exploit us.
Right.
The people who would try to turn us into followers of their own twisted visions. And on that note, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into the world of Charles Manson. It's a chilling reminder of the dark side of charisma and how important it is to be vigilant, to stay informed, and most of all, to stay empowered.